Good morning.
Hopefully you can all hear me. I know that several of you are still muted at this point, but let me welcome you all to the Zoom. With us today, we have Jenna Small, who is from Dover. She is an unemployment recipient. We have Susan Sorensen, who is self-employed and is also a recipient. We have Steve Tower with New Hampshire Legal Assistance, and Benjamin King, who's an attorney at Douglas, Leonard and Garvey. I also want to point out Elizabeth Malia, who is with my staff, and I think we may have, and Sarah Holmes, who is my state director, is here with me in the office this morning. And we may be joined by Ariel Marshall, who's my legislative director in Washington, but she is not yet on. And Alan Rodriguez is managing the Zoom for us all. So thank you, Alan, for doing that. We are also joined by Mike Cousineau, who is with the Union Leader, and someone from WMUR. So again, thank you all very much. I really wanted to have this conversation this morning because, as you know, the next package of assistance to deal with the coronavirus is stalled in Washington. And one of the stumbling blocks is whether we're going to continue unemployment insurance for so many people who are out of work. We know in New Hampshire that our unemployment rate in June was 11.7%. I haven't seen the July numbers yet, but it's significant. The unemployment numbers nationwide that came out showed that the unemployment rate is still about 10% in the country. So it is significant, and there are still a lot of people who are unemployed who need help. And one of the things we've heard from a number of economists over the last month or so is that the unemployment benefits have really helped bolster the economy as a whole, because what people have done with those dollars is paid their rent, bought groceries, basically spent them, which has helped to keep the economy afloat. And so this is very important. I know we have our beneficiaries this morning who are on the call are people who we met because they called our office looking for help with unemployment. And so we asked them to join us to tell their stories. And we asked Benjamin and Steve to talk a little bit about what they're seeing from clients in their offices who are dealing with being unemployed because of the coronavirus. So I'm going to ask you, Steve, if you would like to begin to talk a little bit about what you're seeing, and then we'll go through and each of our participants will hopefully tell your stories about what you're seeing and why you think it's so important that we do something to continue to help people who are unemployed, who need help to get through this difficult time. So Steve.
Great, thank you, Sandra. I work for New Hampshire Legal, a nonprofit law firm that provides free legal representation to low-income families and seniors. We have seen a massive boom in the amount of unemployment claims that we are assisting with and that people are requesting help with us for. Prior to the pandemic, we were not seeing many unemployment cases come to us, maybe 1 or 2 a month. And the volume of cases that have been coming in since March have taken over our public benefits practice. We've been in the process of bringing on some more staff to help with both the number of unemployment cases that we have been seeing, and then the current and ongoing avalanche of evictions that we will be seeing as the unemployment benefits have now, the additional $600 a week federal unemployment benefits have stopped. We believe that $600 a week has helped avoid the avalanche up until this point, even though the eviction moratorium ended back in June. The additional $600 a week we think was critical in allowing people to continue to pay rent. We have worked very carefully with New Hampshire Employment Security as they have been implementing these new federal programs. It has not been without its hiccups and difficulties, as I'm sure any of the unemployment recipients who are on the call can testify to. Part of the problem arose from the new federal programs not being immediately able to work with the software that New Hampshire Employment Security had been using for its state unemployment system. And then when we've added the pandemic unemployment assistance benefits, which are essentially unemployment for folks who would not normally be eligible for state unemployment because they didn't have a long enough work history or they were about to start a job and that offer fell through. Then there's also the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, which is that additional $600 a week, which ended in the end of July. And there's another federal program called Federal Emergency Unemployment Compensation, which it adds an additional 13 weeks of eligibility to the amount of weeks that people can receive benefits for. And that has some complications with a previous existing aspect of the unemployment law called extended benefits, which extended benefits is additional weeks of unemployment that somebody is eligible for when the state's unemployment percentage statewide reaches a certain level. And then those extra weeks become available for people who are unemployed. We're currently seeing some complications in the way that extended benefits and the federal emergency unemployment compensation are interacting for people who have been unemployed for an extended period of time. That seems to be the new issue that we're trying to sort out with New Hampshire Employment Security. Prior to that, we had seen some issues where people's claims for pandemic unemployment assistance had been held up because of the requirement that the state has to decide somebody is not eligible for regular state unemployment before they can get the federal pandemic unemployment assistance, which again is for people who are not normally eligible for state benefits. And the way the department was doing that, because of the way their software was designed, was they would send out a notice to people who had applied for unemployment saying, you're not eligible for unemployment. And of course, everyone says, but I lost my job because of the coronavirus, so I should be eligible, and they file an appeal. And while that appeal was pending, it would prevent the department from issuing a decision on the pandemic unemployment assistance, which they were eligible for, the federal program. Their notice didn't really make the distinction clear, but a lot of people sort of got stuck in this loop of getting denied for the state unemployment benefits, then not understanding that they were still waiting for their federal unemployment benefit decision, and then they would appeal that state decision, and that would slow things down. So it's taken a while, but it appears that New Hampshire Employment Security has more or less resolved that issue. People we're not seeing a lot of cases where people are still waiting for that pandemic unemployment assistance who had previously denied state benefits. But something we are still seeing is some folks who, after waiting many, many weeks to get that pandemic unemployment assistance award, they're still waiting for some of the back weeks, the weeks from back in June or May, where they were still waiting for benefits. And some of those have not been paid. We've seen some cases where the base level benefits of the $168 a week had been paid, but they had not received the $600 a week for those past weeks. And we're still in the process of getting those cases worked through with the department. But in short, what we have seen with working with folks is these delays are terrifying for families, because when they're waiting for their checks from those weeks of benefits that haven't arrived yet, they've been out of work, they've fallen behind on their bills, evictions are now able to start up again. We are working on some protections for utility customers, so folks won't be facing electric or gas shutoffs in the coming months. But that's something that's on people's minds. They have to pay for food, they have to pay their car payments, and it's very difficult to do that on what the current state unemployment benefit amount is. New Hampshire's general weekly benefit, average weekly benefit amount is on the lower side among the 50 states. I think it's in the bottom third. And for someone who went from having a full-time job where they were able to support their family, suddenly being out of that work and receiving substantially less each week in unemployment benefits, most families that we work with, and even many families who are not our clients, a lot of my friends don't have an extra month of savings to pay for their bills for a month if they suddenly lost all of their income. So that need to be able to keep going with these unemployment benefits is something that is affecting not just our client base, but a larger section of the state. I'm sorry, Senator, one more thing.
No, go ahead.
One of the big issues that we've been dealing with folks is the people who are now back to work because the state's economy is starting to get going again. But if they have been in contact with someone who is tested positive, or one of their children had been in contact with a child who had tested positive, they are now having to self-quarantine for 14 days, missing 2 weeks of work until their tests come back. We've had a couple clients where people have been back to work, but because other members of their family have been in contact with someone who had the coronavirus, they've had to leave work again for short term for a couple weeks, or until their tests come back. And sometimes they've had to do that more than once. And even though people are now getting back to work, there is going to continue to be disruptions in people's availability to be at work because of self-quarantining, because of positive tests for coronavirus, because of needs to care for elderly family members or children. So this is going to continue to be an issue going forward.
Thanks very much, Steve. One of the other things that I think you would probably agree is that many of those people who have been exposed to the coronavirus are in essential jobs. They're at work where they have to go to work, and therefore they are more often exposed. So it's harder for many of those folks to self-isolate. And so as a result, they have more financial difficulties because of the situation they're in, often in jobs that don't pay as much, often really dependent on that unemployment assistance for when they are out of work, and when they're exposed to the coronavirus are not able to collect again. And that's a real challenge.
Yeah, we certainly don't want people in this situation where they say, I have a little bit of a cough today, but I can't take 2 weeks off of work. I can't afford it. We don't want people making that decision.
Absolutely. It's in everyone's interest to have people stay home when they might have the coronavirus. Jenna, you can speak really directly to the challenges you faced as somebody who was laid off because of the stay-at-home orders, and the challenges that you had, and how important those unemployment benefits have been to you.
Yep. So I am a college student. I'll be a junior at Merrimack College this fall in North Andover, Mass. But I was attending school this spring like everybody else, and then I was on spring break, and then it was just going to be an extra week of spring break, and now we're in August. So we didn't know obviously what was going to happen in the beginning, but going home from school without a job was scary, because I know me and my sister happen to work at the same restaurant. So if I am laid off, then she is also laid off. My mother works as a nurse in Portsmouth, but she's clinical, so her hours have been reduced because she's not working with the surge of ER or emergency patients that we have for the coronavirus. So coming home and still having to complete a year of school and try and figure out how I'm going to even finish paying for this year, let alone start paying for the fall or paying for my car or gas, things that my mom can't cover for me because she can barely cover the house. It was really stressful and scary. And I think your office, Senator Shaheen, has just done a wonderful job with reaching out and making sure that I could understand even the employment software, the unemployment software, because that was a big holdup for me in the beginning, was how difficult it was to even figure out how to file for unemployment as a 20-year-old younger person who might be better with technology. The website was a little outdated, but then for my mom, who's never applied for unemployment, she couldn't help me because it was also a little tangled up and confusing. So it was a lot of roadblocks and working with it. And I really appreciate your help because I still have friends who haven't received back pay or have had huge struggles with receiving unemployment at all. And I know that it has made me feel more secure and able to take care of the things I need to take care of, the bills at the base level, that I can pay for my car, that I can do whatever I need to do this week and be able to help my family and not be stressing out my mom even more, anything like that.
Jenna, will you be able to go back to school this fall, and are they going to bring students back in person?
So they have decided to bring students back in person because Merrimack's a relatively small school, and I think not all the students are going back. They're going to do everything they can to put all of these measures in place to keep everybody as safe as possible. And I recently, just this week, got a job actually as a student health ambassador working in one of those teams on campus and the testing center or whatever it is, to kind of get a look at how coronavirus is affecting our campus.
That's great. So you won't be on unemployment for an extended period of time then because you've gotten another job. That's terrific. And tell us what you're majoring in.
I'm majoring in health sciences with a minor in political science.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have on the phone Susan Sorensen. Susan, do you want to talk about your situation and what unemployment insurance has meant for you? Maybe we may have lost Susan here. So while we're waiting for her to get back on, Benjamin, tell us what you're seeing from your clients.
Certainly, and thank you, Senator, for inviting me to participate this morning. I appreciate it. As an employee rights attorney, what I've seen is that the additional federal unemployment assistance provided really an essential safety net, especially for employees of small employers who have been advised by their doctors to quarantine because they suffer from a condition that places them at a heightened risk if they do contract COVID-19. Now, as you know, Senator, Congress has passed and the President has signed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which remains in effect till through December 31st of this year. And that act does provide some protections, but those protections are often insufficient. So you take the case of an employee who's been advised, an employee of an employer with 499 employees or fewer, who's been advised by their doctor to quarantine because they have COPD or they're immunocompromised in some other way that places them at a heightened risk if they do contract COVID-19. Those people would get 2 weeks of leave at full pay from their employer. But after those 2 weeks expire, I've seen a lot of employees who have been advised to quarantine by their doctors for months, going into August, because the pandemic is not under control, and those people remain at a high risk of serious health consequences because of their underlying health condition if they contract COVID-19. But once the initial 2 weeks of sick leave runs out, many of those employees have no further protections. If they work for an employer with fewer than 50 employees, then under no circumstances are they going to qualify for family and medical leave. If they do qualify for family and medical leave, then that leave is unpaid. Some of those people may qualify for reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but not because COVID is a disability, but because the underlying condition that the person has is a disability, those people may be entitled to leave as a reasonable accommodation. But if the employer doesn't grant the leave, the employee does not have an immediate remedy. The employee can go to the New Hampshire Commission for Human Rights, file a charge of discrimination, but the Commission for Human Rights doesn't have the power to grant injunctive relief and go into the employer and force the employer to grant the reasonable accommodation. It's a long process. So the long and short of it is, after those 2 weeks of sick leave benefits expire, many of those employees are forced to choose between their doctor's recommendation to continue to quarantine, because if you contract this novel coronavirus, you're at a high risk of having serious health consequences, or to ignore the doctor's advice and go back to work at their peril. So certainly the $600 federal unemployment assistance was a safety net for a lot of people, but in my practice, I've seen it to be particularly important for those people who are vulnerable because of underlying health conditions, who work for a small employer, and who really only have their job protected for 2 weeks if their doctor advises them to quarantine.
Thanks very much, Benjamin. Susan, you're back. So
yes, sorry.
That's okay. We had lost you, and I had called on you to see if you would tell us your story of how you happened to need unemployment insurance.
Yes, I did, Senator Shaheen. I am self-employed. I'm a New Hampshire licensed esthetician. I have a business in Lebanon. My last day of work was March 20th, and I was shut down along with thousands of other people in similar businesses for nearly 2.5 months, and was permitted to reopen on June 1st for limited services and fully reopen on June 14th with precautions in place. During that time, I did seek unemployment for the first time in my life, and I encountered exactly the same scenario that some of the earlier speakers have mentioned. It took 5 weeks until my unemployment came through, and I feel that it came through at that time because of one of your staffers who was wonderful. But it was the same thing. I am self-employed, so I was at the bottom of the totem pole as far as unemployment was concerned. The system is not set up for that. I have a 21-year-old college son who was sent home, was told not to come back after spring break because of all of this kind of exploded at that time. So I was grateful, very grateful for the assistance that I got, but I will tell you that it was an extremely stressful 5 weeks. trying to juggle money for groceries for myself and my son. When was my business going to be allowed to reopen? There were so many unknowns. And I think that is one of the core issues, is that there are so many unknowns. And I would like for Congress to know that that benefits for people must continue. I am back at work. But this is enduring, and this is something that's going, I think that we're all going to be living with at least until next spring. And these benefits that have run out at the end of July or are running out while the virus is still going on really are just untenable for a lot of people. And people have, some of the earlier speakers have spoken very eloquently about the impacts on these families. I'm lucky because there are just two of us. My son has a paid summer internship, and I am back to work at this point, but a lot of people aren't. So I would ask Congress to take that into consideration, and thank you for having this session so that people can be heard.
Thanks very much, Susan, for being willing to tell us what your situation is. Can I ask, are you back to 100% of where your business was before you had to shut down? Or are you still seeing a decline?
No, I've got about 40% of my clients back. And my industry is highly regulated. Our infection control practices are highly regulated, more than a lot of other places I can think of. And I believe that we're one of the safest places to be, but people are afraid to come back out. So, my business is at about 40%, and I do not anticipate that ramping up quickly.
And did you consider applying for a PPP loan?
Yes, I did apply for a PPP loan. I did. I waited for 5 weeks, as I mentioned, for my unemployment. I received that on a Tuesday, retroactively. And that, by the way, was $676 a week. And that was after and that included the $600 a week federal benefit. If I hadn't had that federal benefit, I just would have been terrible. So yeah, I don't anticipate being fully up and running for a while.
Yeah, and I think that sadly that's the story of so many very small businesses, particularly those people who are self-employed. Even though you're back to work and that's great, you're still seeing a real decline in business because, as you point out, so many people are worried about going out. I think everybody's talked about that.
Yes,
concern.
And I did get the PPL too, Senator Shaheen. I did apply for that, but that was for 8 weeks. I mean,
sure,
that money is gone at this point. So yeah, I'm grateful for that.
And we have extended the time period to 24 weeks, and hopefully we can get another round for businesses who need it if in this next package. But as you point out, it's limited, as everything, all of these measures are. And so the more we can do to provide help to people who need it, the better. I'm going to ask Elizabeth, who worked with several of you and so many people who have had difficulties with the unemployment system, if you would speak, Elizabeth, to Wendy Rapa, who was going to be on the call this morning, and then she had a family emergency come up. But can you talk about her story a little bit? She owns her own small business in Deerfield. You need to unmute yourself, Elizabeth.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So Wendy contacted Senator Shaheen for assistance. She owns a grocery store in Deerfield, a small specialty grocery store, and she actually was looking for assistance for her husband, who she employs, and her father, who she employs. It's a small family business. And she had mentioned to our office that she was denied unemployment for herself, so she assumed that she didn't get it. And we worked with her to let her know that, like many folks, you received a denial letter, but that doesn't mean you're actually denied, and helped her kind of file for unemployment and get that benefit. And she shared some notes with us about her thoughts, and she says, There is no way I can emphasize what a lifeline the program was for me. I'm happy to say we are open once again for business and have hired additional staff to help us get back to the level of sales we realized in our first 2.5 years. I'm the second generation of the second family to own Blue Bowl, which has been in business since 1936. Much of our future success will be a result of what happens next, since many of our customers are still out of work without adequate money for basic necessities. We will not be able to sustain or grow our business or retain the employees we need to run our business, and may find ourselves facing the hard decisions of whether to continue on or close altogether. I'm hopeful Republican lawmakers will stop thinking of the unemployment assistance as a deterrent to work and realize what a critical role the program has played in the lives of so many of us who need to feed and care for our families and want to do good work and require a safe environment to work in. We pray the Republicans will be able to recognize the critical need this program has provided while we wait for the effective vaccine to come. I truly appreciate Senator Shaheen's willingness and ability to take on the hard issues of our time and do what is best and right for the American people today and always.
Well, thanks for reading that statement from Wendy Elizabeth. One of the things that we didn't talk about, but I think it's implicit, Steve, in what you had to say, and Benjamin, is that one of the challenges with changing the current unemployment program at this point is that we will then go through another whole delay in getting any new changes up and running and also making those available to people. So that's one of the incentives to try and continue the current program, because we know it's helping people. We know that there were bugs in the program that are still being worked out. Many of them have been worked out, but any changes at this point will put us back into that cycle where people are going to have trouble again with the system. So I don't know, Steve or Benjamin, if either of you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely accurate, Senator. And I'll note that many other states in the country had much longer delays in these unemployment benefits being dispersed than we did here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire Employment Security, although it was a lot of headaches and frustration for a lot of applicants, I think given the level of new applicants they were dealing with, did a great job. As you said, if we have to redesign the program and redevelop software and plans for implementing a new program, it's going to cause more delays, and that's not something anyone can afford right now.
Absolutely, and as you say, I agree. I think the Department of Employment Security in New Hampshire did an excellent job of dealing with the crisis that we are still dealing with, and the use of the New Hampshire National Guard to help answer phones. I mean, everybody worked very hard to try and respond to what we were hearing. Our office, as Elizabeth can tell you, worked overtime to try and respond, and I'm sure the same is true of the other members of the congressional delegation and the governor's office. So everyone has worked really hard, and we need to make sure that the help that has been available continues to be available. So I don't know, Benjamin, if you wanted to add anything to Steve's comments.
I don't think I have anything additional to add, Senator.
Great, thank you. I know we have several reporters on the call. I don't know if any of them would like to ask questions while we have Susan and Jenna on. Well, hearing none, thank you all so much. I will continue to do everything that I can in Washington to see if we can get a bipartisan extension of unemployment that's going to continue to help people who are out of work. It's clear that until we get the coronavirus under control, that we are going to continue to have the fallout in our economy. We're going to continue to have people out of work, continue to have businesses who are in difficulty. And the most important thing we can do is to get this coronavirus under control. We need a plan for testing and contact tracing at the federal level, which we still haven't seen. We need to better invoke the Defense Production Act to ensure that we have enough personal protective equipment and other domestic supplies to respond to the pandemic. And I will be doing everything I can in Washington to try and address what I'm hearing from all of you in New Hampshire about the challenges that we face and the need to extend help for people who are really just need to get through this emergency, this crisis period, so that they can get back to their jobs, get their businesses started up again, get back to work, and get this economy moving again. So thank you all so much for joining me this morning and for everything you're doing during this difficult period.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.